My name is Margaret Carter, and at 32, I thought I understood the rhythms of Pumice Heights Hospital in Ash Valley, Washington. As a registered nurse in the cardiac unit, I'd spent 5 years learning every sound, the soft beep of monitors, the whispered conversations at the nurse's station, the gentle hum of equipment that meant everything was functioning as it should. But lately, something felt different. It started with small things, schedules that didn't quite align with what I remembered discussing, assignments that seemed heavier than usual, while other nurses appeared to have lighter loads. The way conversations would pause when I approached the break room, then resume with forced brightness. "Margaret, you're on room 314 through 320 today," my clinical supervisor, Gabriel Walker, announced during morning huddle. His smile was warm, the same one that had welcomed me through countless shifts over the past 3 years. "I know it's a full assignment, but you handle complex cases so well." I nodded, accepting the patient list without question. Gabriel had always been supportive, especially during my family emergency last year when my mother was hospitalized. He'd covered my shifts personally, worked overtime to ensure my patients received excellent care, and never once made me feel guilty for the time I needed away. Trust, I'd learned, was the foundation of good healthcare. We trusted each other to show up, to communicate clearly, to have each other's backs when things got difficult. Gabriel had earned that trust completely. The morning progressed normally until I noticed Sarah Margaret Thompson, one of the newer nurses, looking confused at the assignment board. "I thought I was supposed to have 318 and 319, she murmured to herself, checking her phone against the written schedule. "Everything okay?" I asked, pausing beside her. "Oh, just double-checking my assignment. Gabriel mentioned yesterday that I'd have the post-surgical patients in those rooms, but the board shows something different," she shrugged. "Probably just mixed up the conversation." I glanced at the board. Those were indeed part of my assignment for the day. A small knot formed in my stomach, though I couldn't explain why. Scheduling changes happened constantly in hospitals. Patient discharges, admissions, acuity adjustments. It was normal. But as the week continued, I noticed more discrepancies. Conversations I was certain I'd had about scheduling that seemed to have different outcomes. Colleagues mentioning assignments they thought they were getting, only to find themselves with completely different patients. The Epic system showed my badge accessing areas during times I knew I was elsewhere. When I mentioned it to Gabriel, he assured me it was probably a system glitch and that he'd look into it. "These electronic systems can be temperamental," he said, his hand briefly touching my shoulder in that familiar, reassuring way. "Don't worry about it. I'll make sure IT knows there might be an issue." During my lunch break, I sat in the small garden courtyard that overlooked the Cascade Mountains. Ash Valley spread below, peaceful and predictable. I'd chosen this hospital specifically for its reputation, excellent patient outcomes, supportive staff culture, opportunities for professional growth. Yet something was shifting beneath the surface, like a hairline crack in a foundation that you couldn't quite see but somehow sensed was there. The afternoon brought another small incident. Diana Margaret Foster from the day shift approached me as I was reviewing patient charts. "Hey, Margaret, I wanted to apologize for the confusion yesterday. I thought Gabriel had asked me to take your 3 p.m. medication rounds, but when I went to do them, you'd already completed everything." I looked up from my computer. I didn't know anyone else was supposed to handle those rounds. That's what I figured when I saw you'd already done them. Must have been a miscommunication. Diana's expression was apologetic but puzzled. Gabriel seemed surprised when I told him, though, almost like he expected you to have missed them. The knot in my stomach tightened. That evening, as I prepared to leave, I noticed Gabriel still at his desk, typing intently on his computer. The glow from his monitor cast shadows across his face, making his familiar features look somehow different. When he noticed me watching, his expression shifted back to its usual warmth. "Long day?" he asked. "They all are lately," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Well, you're doing excellent work. The patients always speak highly of you, and your documentation is impeccable." He paused, studying me. "Is everything all right? You seem a bit stressed." "Just tired, I think." "Make sure you're taking care of yourself. This job can be demanding, and I'd hate to see you burn out." His concern seemed genuine, the same caring tone he'd used when checking on me during my mother's illness. But something in his eyes didn't quite match his words. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the foundation I'd trusted was beginning to crack. The question was whether I was imagining the instability, or if something was genuinely wrong. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of an early autumn. But for the first time since starting at Pumice Heights, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something was happening, and I was starting to suspect I was at the center of it. The next few weeks brought a series of small incidents that, individually, seemed like honest mistakes. Collectively, they painted a troubling picture. It started with the scheduling conflicts. I'd arrive for my shift to find that Gabriel had assigned me to cover the cardiac unit, only to discover that another nurse, Catherine Walker, had been given the same assignment. We'd stand there, both holding printed schedules that showed our names in the same slot, trying to figure out who was supposed to be where. "This is the third time this month," Catherine said, comparing our schedules. "Either the system's glitching, or someone's making errors in the assignments." Gabriel always appeared genuinely confused when we brought these conflicts to his attention. He'd frown at his computer screen, scrolling through the scheduling software with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been using it for years. "I don't understand how this keeps happening," he'd say, making quick adjustments. "Margaret, why don't you take the medical floor today? Catherine, you can handle cardiac." The changes always seemed to work out in everyone else's favor. I found myself consistently assigned to the more challenging units, the ones with higher patient loads or more complex cases. When I mentioned this pattern to Gabriel, he assured me it was because he trusted my skills. "You're one of our most capable nurses," he'd say. "I know you can handle the difficult assignments." It should have felt like a compliment, but instead, it felt like punishment. The medication discrepancies started appearing around the same time. I'd complete my rounds, documenting everything meticulously in the Epic system, only to have pharmacy call the next day, asking about missing signatures or questioning dosages that I was certain I'd administered correctly. "Margaret, we're showing that Mrs. Henderson in room 314 didn't receive her evening insulin yesterday," the pharmacy tech would say. "But there's no documentation explaining why." I'd pull up the records, my heart racing as I searched for the entries I knew I'd made. Sometimes they were there, sometimes they weren't. The inconsistency was maddening. Gabriel was always supportive during these conversations. He'd review the records with me, his expression concerned but not accusatory. "These things happen," he'd say. "The system can be unreliable sometimes. Just make sure you're double-checking your entries." But I was double-checking. I was triple-checking. I'd started taking photos of my completed medication logs with my personal phone, just to have proof of what I'd documented. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late September. I was finishing my shift when Diana approached me in the break room, her expression troubled. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" She glanced around to make sure we were alone. "Have you been having problems with Gabriel lately?" My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" "It's probably nothing, but..." She sat down across from me. "I was in his office earlier, dropping off some paperwork, and I saw your schedule on his desk. He was making changes to it, moving your assignments around. He does that for everyone. Staffing adjustments happen all the time." That's what I thought, but then I noticed the dates. He was changing assignments you'd already completed. From last week. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "That doesn't make sense." I thought so too. When I asked him about it, he said he was just updating the records to reflect some last-minute changes that hadn't been entered properly. Diana's voice dropped to a whisper. "But Margaret, I saw him change your Tuesday assignment from the medical floor to the ICU. I remember Tuesday because I worked medical that day, and you definitely weren't there." My hand started to shake. "Are you sure?" "Positive. And there's something else." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her messages. "Remember last month when you got written up for missing that staff meeting?" I nodded. The memory still stung. Gabriel had seemed genuinely disappointed when he'd handed me the disciplinary notice, explaining that attendance at monthly staff meetings was mandatory and that my absence had been noted by administration. "I checked my calendar after you mentioned it," Diana continued. "That meeting was scheduled for the same day you were covering my shift in the ER. Gabriel specifically asked you to take that assignment because I had a family emergency." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. He scheduled me to work during the meeting, and then wrote you up for missing it. I stared at the table, my mind racing through the past few months. Every scheduling conflict, every missing documentation, every time I'd appeared unreliable or unprepared, Gabriel had been involved in all of it. Why would he do this? I whispered. Diana shook her head. I don't know. But Margaret, you need to be careful. Document everything. Save copies of your schedules, your assignments, anything that shows what you were actually supposed to be doing. That night, I went home and spread out every piece of paperwork I had from the past 3 months. Schedules, assignment sheets, disciplinary notices, performance reviews. When I laid them out chronologically, the pattern was undeniable. Gabriel had been systematically sabotaging me. The man who had covered my shifts during my mother's illness, who had offered me guidance and support, who had seemed like a mentor and friend. He had been deliberately undermining my career. I thought about all the times he'd expressed concern for my well-being, all the reassurances he'd given me when things went wrong. The caring supervisor had been just that N. But why? What had I done to deserve this? I'd been a loyal employee, a dedicated nurse, someone who'd always gone above and beyond for my patients and my colleagues. As I sat in my apartment, surrounded by Gabriel's betrayal, I realized that the answer to why might not matter as much as the answer to what now. I had proof. Not enough to take to administration yet, but enough to know that I wasn't losing my mind. The mistakes, the conflicts, the problems that had been making me question my own competence, they weren't my fault. Gabriel Walker had been playing a long game, and I'd been his unwitting target. The question now was whether I could prove it before he succeeded in destroying my career entirely. The next morning, I arrived at Pumice Heights with a folder containing copies of everything. Diana had agreed to meet me before our shift started, and we found a quiet corner in the staff break room on the 3rd floor. I've been thinking about this all night, Diana said, keeping her voice low. We need to be strategic. Gabriel has been here for 8 years. He has relationships with administration that you don't. I nodded, my stomach tight with anxiety. So what do you suggest? We document everything going. Every interaction, every assignment change, every conversation. And we need to find out if you're the only target. That phrase sent a chill through me. You think he's done this to others? I think someone doesn't just wake up one day and decide to systematically sabotage a colleague. This feels practiced. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane and I became investigators in our own workplace. She started paying closer attention to Gabriel's interactions with other staff members, while I meticulously documented every assignment, every schedule change, every directive he gave me. The pattern became even clearer. Gabriel would assign me to patients in rooms that required specific equipment, then forget to mention that the equipment was being serviced. He'd schedule me for mandatory training sessions, then change my patient assignments at the last minute, so I'd have to choose between abandoning my patients or missing the training. Each incident was small enough to seem like an honest mistake or poor communication, but together they painted a picture of deliberate sabotage. Diana discovered something else. Remember Catherine Walker from the night shift? She transferred to Seattle Presbyterian 6 months ago. I remember her. She was a good nurse. I ran into her at the grocery store yesterday. Margaret. She left because of Gabriel. She said he made her work environment so toxic that she couldn't stay, but she never reported it because she couldn't prove anything concrete. My hands clenched into fists. How many others? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. The breakthrough came during my 3rd week of documentation. Gabriel called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon, his expression serious. Margaret, I need to talk to you about your performance lately. I sat across from his desk, my phone recording in my pocket. Diana's suggestion. What about it? You missed the infection control update yesterday. And Mrs. Patterson in 314 complained that you seemed distracted during her medication administration. I kept my voice steady. I was covering for Amanda Walker in the ICU because you reassigned her to surgery at the last minute. And Mrs. Patterson's medications were administered correctly and on time. I have the documentation. Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly. That's not the point, Margaret. The point is that you're not managing your responsibilities effectively. Which responsibilities specifically? Your patient load, your continuing education requirements, your team collaboration. I pulled out my folder. I've been tracking my assignments for the past few weeks. Would you like to review them together? For the first time since I'd known him, Gabriel looked genuinely surprised. That's not necessary. I think it is. I opened the folder and spread out the documentation. Here's yesterday's original assignment sheet, and here's the revision you gave me at 2 p.m. Here's the infection control training schedule you gave me last week, and here's the patient assignment that conflicted with it. Gabriel stared at the papers, his face carefully neutral. Margaret, I think you're overthinking this. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like there's been a systematic pattern of conflicting assignments and impossible expectations. I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making. The threat in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. I'm not making accusations. I'm presenting documentation. Gabriel stood up. I think this conversation is over. I think it's just beginning. That evening, Diana and I met with Margaret Thompson, the nurse manager for our unit. I'd requested the meeting through official channels, and Diana had agreed to serve as my witness. Margaret Thompson was in her 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd been at Pumice Heights for 15 years, and had a reputation for fairness but also for not tolerating drama. What can I do for you, Margaret? She asked, gesturing for us to sit in her office. I took a deep breath. I need to report a pattern of professional misconduct by my clinical supervisor. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her posture straighten slightly. That's a serious allegation. What kind of misconduct? I laid out everything. The conflicting assignments, the impossible schedules, the pattern of sabotage that had been making me appear unreliable and incompetent. I showed her my documentation, the timeline I'd created, the I'd gathered. Diana corroborated what she'd witnessed and shared what she'd learned about Catherine Walker and potentially other nurses who'd left the unit. Margaret Thompson listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting to see specific documents. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. This is very concerning, she finally said. I'm going to need to conduct a formal investigation. That means interviews with relevant staff members, a review of scheduling records, and a thorough examination of the documentation you've provided. What happens to Gabriel during the investigation? He'll be informed that an investigation is taking place, but he'll continue in his role unless we find of immediate risk to patient safety or staff welfare. My heart sank. So he'll know I reported him. Yes. But Margaret, you've done the right thing. If what you're alleging is true, this is a serious violation of professional standards and potentially grounds for disciplinary action up to and including termination. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Gabriel's behavior toward me became icily professional. He spoke to me only when necessary, and his assignments became scrupulously fair, almost as if he knew he was being watched. But the damage to our working relationship was complete. The man I'd once trusted and respected now felt like a stranger, and every interaction was tainted by the knowledge of what he'd done. Diana kept me updated on the investigation's progress. Margaret Thompson interviewed 12 staff members, including Catherine Walker, who drove down from Seattle to give her statement. The scheduling records from the past year were pulled and analyzed. The pattern of sabotage became undeniable. On a Thursday morning in late October, Margaret Thompson called me into her office again. The investigation is complete, she said. I want you to know that your allegations have been substantiated. Gabriel Walker has been terminated, effective immediately. The relief was so overwhelming that I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from falling over. What happens now? Now you continue doing the excellent work you've always done. Gabriel's termination will be noted in his personnel file, and he will not be eligible for rehire at any facility in our health system. And the other nurses he targeted, Catherine Walker has been offered her position back if she chooses to return. We're also reviewing the circumstances surrounding several other departures from this unit over the past 2 years. I walked out of Margaret Thompson's office feeling like I could breathe fully for the first time in months. The weight I'd been carrying, the constant second-guessing of my own competence, the fear that I was losing my mind, all of it lifted. Diana was waiting for me in the hallway. How did it go? He's gone. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled back. The betrayal had cut deep, but the truth had finally surfaced. Gabriel Walker's carefully constructed campaign of sabotage had been exposed, and justice had been served. 6 months later, I stood in the break room of Cedar Valley Medical Center, 30 miles north of Ash Valley, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold through the large windows. The coffee was better here, the schedules were transparent, and my new supervisor, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, had an open-door policy that she actually meant. The transfer had been surprisingly smooth. Margaret Thompson had provided an exemplary reference, and word of Gabriel Walker's termination had quietly spread through the regional healthcare network. No one asked uncomfortable questions about why I'd left Pumice Heights Hospital. Catherine Walker had decided not to return to our old unit. She'd found a position in pediatric oncology at Children's Hospital in Seattle, where her gentle nature was perfectly suited to caring for young patients and their families. We exchanged emails occasionally, both of us healing in our own ways. Diana Martinez, no relation to my new supervisor, had been promoted to charge nurse of the cardiac unit. She'd earned it through her integrity and courage during those difficult months. When she called to tell me about the promotion, her voice carried the confidence that Gabriel Walker had tried so hard to undermine in all of us. The investigation at Pumice Heights had uncovered more than just my case. 2 other nurses who'd left the unit in the previous year came after hearing about Gabriel's termination. The pattern of sabotage stretched back further than anyone had realized, a systematic campaign of professional destruction that had cost careers and damaged lives. I'd started a small support group for healthcare workers who'd experienced workplace betrayal. We met monthly at a community center in Ash Valley, sharing stories and strategies for rebuilding trust in ourselves and our profession. The group had grown from 3 members to 15, and I'd been asked to speak at a state nursing conference about recognizing and addressing professional sabotage. The work felt meaningful in a way that went beyond patient care. I mentor healthcare workers who have experienced workplace betrayal, helping them navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges of rebuilding their careers. Each person who found their voice, again, who learned to trust their instincts, who refused to let someone else's cruelty define their worth, they were victories that mattered. My new position at Cedar Valley was everything I'd hoped for. The cardiac unit was busy but well-staffed, the equipment was modern, and the team functioned with the kind of mutual respect I'd forgotten was possible. No one questioned my competence or second-guessed my decisions. My schedule was posted 2 weeks in advance and never changed without my consent. Sometimes, driving home through the mountain passes, I thought about Gabriel Walker and wondered if he'd found another position somewhere. The healthcare field was large, and people moved frequently. But his termination would follow him, a permanent mark on his record that would make it difficult to gain the trust necessary to repeat his pattern of abuse. The betrayal had changed me, but not in the ways I'd feared. I was more cautious now, more aware of the subtle signs of manipulation and professional sabotage. But I was also stronger, more confident in my abilities, and more committed to protecting others from the kind of systematic undermining I'd endured. The silence in my life now was different from the oppressive quiet that had marked those final months at Pumice Heights. This was the peaceful silence of a storm that had passed, of a battle that had been fought and won. It was finally over, and the silence felt earned.